Ahoy! We had the balance of power today, we have some upcoming fixes, and we also have a hint that is worth talking about. So quite a few different things that are in this video. We start with the balance of power from today. The first thing David was asked was how he feels about the current gearing. He says he's overall happy with it, there's a certain cleanness to it, the difficulty and activity determine what kind of gear you get in a decent way. There is some tuning to be done still though, because the gear that you get from story expeditions is too good. They've already nerfed that now. But on the other hand, the OPR and arena caches are relatively bad or too bad. And I completely agree with that. They're pretty much not worth opening. I would also like to add influence race caches to that list. They can't even roll health. They're just absolutely terrible. David likes the named item upgrading because it allows you to get very close to Biz or even Biz, and you also have flexibility to perk change later if necessary. There's some chatter about the cost due to the post-PTR price increase. The 3 chromatic seals is actually where they want it. It will stay at that for now. They think it's a very valuable way to get gear and needs to have some expense in return. However, David expects the price for matrices to slowly go down, and more importantly, there will likely be new ways to get chromatic seals over time. So that will be very interesting. I'm very much looking forward to that because faction ones are not ideal for a lot of players. David likes the artifacts as they open up builds and give us more build diversity, and I completely agree with that. He also likes the upgrading system, the quest system around them, and the final perk system. I do believe that they should untie the quest system and the final perk system so that you don't have to kind of abandon quests if you don't have the materials to do the last upgrade at the moment. I think that's a bit annoying, but other than that, I think it's a good system. Of course, they're not all equally balanced, we'll get to that in a bit. The speed of gearing is definitely faster than in the past, but that's also overall what they wanted, and I think that's a good thing. I completely agree with the goals that they had there. Currently, only roughly 3% of all players have full 700 gear even, and that doesn't necessarily imply that they have good 700 gear. This will also allow players to try out more different builds easier, so that's great too. When it comes to the state of balance, a lot of it is still very much in flux, and it is worth keeping in mind here that David recorded this, or he said roughly 2 weeks into the patch. We're now roughly 3.5 weeks into the patch, so I think especially in the last 1.5 weeks, a lot of things about balance have already changed as well, so we might see some new developments there in the near future. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. At the time of recording this, David said not much had changed yet. In Arena, the stats are still the same. The top 3 winning weapons in Arena are Lifestaff, Blunderbuss, and then Ice Gauntlet and Firestaff roughly tied for 3rd. In terms of highest damage in the Arena, Musket, Firestaff, and Bow are actually on top. Very interesting to see the Musket that I have up here. I guess that's also because only a handful of players really play it there in the first place that know what they're doing with the musket. David says that maybe the blunderbuss will get a look, but it's also hard to balance because of its nature. I would expect that this is more likely to happen now. I think the blunderbuss is becoming more and more prominent in Arena at the moment, especially again throughout the last 1.5 weeks or so. So I could see that maybe now the shift is a bit more drastic than it was when that video was recorded. In Outpost Rush, the winning and highest damaging weapons are also still the same. The top 3 winning weapons are Great Axe, Lifestaff, and Blunderbuss, and the top 3 damaging weapons are Musket, Firestaff, and Bow. It is noteworthy that the Blunderbuss shows up twice here, and so of course does the Lifestaff, but that's less of a surprise. But also the Firestaff has a very strong presence here with the top 3 arena wins and damage, and then also damage in OPR. And I think that is one that might be looked at in the future as well, considering that Firestaff is also a relatively strong weapon overall at the moment. In War, we're seeing more significant changes. The Void Gauntlet usage and win rate has increased, and David's guess here is that this is because of the Life Taker artifact. My guess is actually different. I think the Life Taker is most certainly a factor, but I also believe that the Flail, in particular, works very nicely in a bruiser/tank build with the Void Gauntlet with a ton of utility, and I think that's something that comes into play here as well. The Great Axe, which already was good in Wars, is increasing in win rate even more, and Dave thinks this is likely due to the Abyss, which seems very likely. In PvE, the Rapier and Greatsword especially show, I quote, a bit of strength. First of all, I'm very glad that they're giving us all this in-depth information for all the different stats and different modes. That is very nice to know. I like to see more of that in the future. But then on the PvE side, David also mentions that they're currently not feeling like those weapons need a hard look yet, especially because you can only have 1 rapier per group. or rather at the highest effectiveness at least, because if you're running multiple rapiers with bleeds, you run into problems. But then again, you can actually kind of work around that with evade builds and whatnot, so maybe not as big of a problem itself as it seems. He also thinks that new resistances require decent diversity still, so that kind of forces other weapons in too. Now, from what I can see so far, that is not exactly how it's playing out, unfortunately, but rather because of the resistances or the percentage reductions being so high, it seems that the direction is currently more to just go into raw damage, because everything else kind of becomes redundant on bosses, and then just focus on having those debuffs for the trash mobs in between. We'll see how that develops and if there's further changes to that. But yeah, I also think that especially the Rapier and Great Axe artifact both are just ridiculously overtuned, because they just are already strong weapons in PvE, and this amps them up even more to a degree that I don't think is reasonable personally. But once again, this was 2 weeks in. A lot of people probably didn't have Serenity yet because they were maybe still grinding PvP track or grinding the upgrades for it. Likewise, the Rapier was even bugged on my server, so I couldn't even get it for quite a while. So maybe these stats have already changed a lot by now as well. And in that case, these weapons might also get a closer look. Ranged weapons are more prominent in expeditions too. They see more usage and more damage out of musket, bow and fire staff. Unfortunately, I believe that these statistics are likely fairly skewed, because Savage Divide was the first expedition. Again, this was roughly after 2 weeks. So that was there for the entire first week, and probably also the most played one, because people wanted to try out the new expedition, and that expedition favors ranged weapons more than any other before it. So I don't think that this data is necessarily something that will translate over as easily for other expeditions, where I'm still seeing a lot more melee presence overall. But then again, if we're moving away from debuffing bosses at least, that could be good news for weapons like the Fire Staff, because then you don't need to focus on bringing various debuffs when you can just do damage. When it comes to the Flail, David is overall generally happy with it and thinks it's relatively balanced. It works as an off-tank and off-heal type of weapon and is very much used in expeditions. It's actually the most used weapon there, likely because people are trying it out too. In PvP it's used a little bit less, not a ton in Arena apparently. It's used a bit more in OPR. Guess it's more of a group fight weapon, so people like to use it in situations where there are larger groups. The win rate overall is fairly neutral, and it looks to be balanced, so they're not planning any big changes at this moment, except maybe look at the synergies with the healing side of things, since they made some nerfs based on the PTR, and David feels like they might have gone a little too far and find a middle ground there. I think especially the left tree capstone passive might be something there. But what I will say here is that I think these statistics are also because people were still learning the Flail at this point, while now we might be seeing a different picture here too, because in my opinion the Flail is very strong and will likely need at least some fixes, maybe even some nerfs. If you want to learn how to unlock the full potential of the Flail, I'll make an updated guide in the very near future, so consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified of that. I will talk about the gearing for that, I will talk about the skill trees and everything, because I think the Flail is actually extremely strong. Then David talked about the elephant in the room, the Shirking, Heals and Ankh issue. He discussed the change on the previous patch on 17th of October, where they reduced the bonus healing on the Ankh from 50 to 25%. They will look at it and see if it's sufficient. If not, the more drastic change would be making Shirking Heals not count as incoming healing. This would be the next step if they still find it unbalanced. Now, unfortunately, I think this was recorded right around the time as we reported the bug about Shirking Heals, which means that likely David wasn't aware of it at the time. So I think that the situation generally would be different now. I think now the first point here would be, oh yeah, there's a massive bug that we're going to fix, and after that we'll see how the balance is, because I think that's important, right? I'm very much against the current state of Shirking Heals because it's just outright massively bugged, so anyone trying to justify that as somehow balanced is just very out of touch with game balance in general. But I also don't think that Shirking Heals should be over-nerfed in terms of the interaction with Ankh before it had any chance to be tested in a balanced state, and in order for that to happen, the scaling needs to be fixed first. The bug needs to be fixed, and then we need to see how it performs without the bug, and if it's actually still too strong at that point, or if it's actually fine. Because as of this moment, the Shirking Heals bug alone is providing almost as much extra heals as Ankh itself, so it's really just completely disproportionate. Likewise, I don't think that healthy toes should be able to bypass the healing pot reduction. If those things are fixed, then we have a much clearer picture of where the ceiling actually stands. David also has his eyes on the Abyss, considering to maybe adjust the bonus damage while under 100% mana. I will say that I initially thought Abyss was going to be extremely strong, and it's definitely a good artifact, but I'm seeing less and less people using it. I think it's just a bit more niche than was originally expected, but then again it might be different in other scenarios, like especially wars are a different story there. Scorpion Sting is also being looked at because it could be affecting the blunderbuss win rates by pulling people in and then blunderbuss comboing them. So they're considering to maybe adjust the amount it pulls in or the reaction type it causes, but no planned immediate action there. I honestly hope that, if anything, they focus on the reaction type it causes and make it maybe not keep you locked down as much after you get pulled in, but I really hope they keep the pull mechanic. I think it's really fun, interesting, unique, and personally I haven't used Scorpion Sting myself, but when I have fought against enemies and they've hit me with it, it always felt fair to me. It was like, yeah, okay, I messed up there, I got hit, I didn't pay attention, I got too cocky, I mispositioned, so I'm getting punished. I didn't really feel like that was bad in itself. It's more so the follow-up combos that maybe could be a problem. But yeah, I hope they don't nerf that one into the ground at least. Life Taker is specifically mentioned as affecting the war meta, but they don't have any immediate plans here yet either. I really don't know if Life Taker will stay on top. I think a lot of people have found that the people using Life Taker are often easy targets if it's, for example, a ranged player. So we'll have to find out what that means in the long run. Of course, the higher burst potential can most certainly be a significant threat, and the higher debuff application as well. There's also a fix coming today to the Brimstone, Sands and Edengrove influence races. Apparently those races were simply not happening, not taking place. We still had some Edengrove races on our server, which is an excellent area for races, by the way, I love it. Though I'm not sure what's going on there, but Brimstone never happened on our server, so that should be fixed now. We'll actually be able to see those races as well. I think that explains why on certain days there was only one race sometimes. Interesting mention here as well, races will now occur in all territories as intended, up to 4 races a day. I have never had 4 races on my server so far, I think. Maximum so far has always been 3 as far as I can tell, so that would be cool to see. Last but not least, someone on J Oddity's Discord made a very interesting discovery yesterday that I wanted to share. J Oddity made a video where he showed this as well. There is apparently a controller hidden in the background in the last Forge and Eternium dev Q&A from the other day, so they might be hinting at future controller support or even a console version in the future. Could be very cool to see. Console version would absolutely be amazing, but I'm not getting my hopes up yet. Just wanted to point out that it's there. I'm going to link Jay's video below if you want to see a little bit more about it. Tomorrow we'll be talking about a very time-sensitive farm for extremely good gear, so consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you'd like to see that, or the Flail guide shortly after that, and hopefully also the Rapier guide at some point this week finally. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.